Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to this session on inferential statistics. In the previous session we discussed the three purposes for which statistics is normally put to use, and the first one is the descriptive statistics, also called the sample statistics, where we look at what the data that we have got suggests to us about the process or the phenomena that we want to study. But we restrict ourselves only to the data that we have. If it's a sample data, we only say and describe what the sample data suggests. We looked at it in terms of the central tendency measures, we looked at the variability measures, and we also looked at the shape measures. One of the most commonly used purposes of statistics is really the inferential statistics, which is to infer certain conclusions about a population from the samples of data. Because as we said, in the descriptive statistics we only focus on what the sample statistics is saying. Supposing there is a population of 1 billion and we had a sample of, let's say, 1 million, so the descriptive statistics will only tell us what the million people are about, what are the characteristics that we are measuring them on. But the general idea of most statistics is really to not just to understand the sample data, but to really make some inferences about the population. Supposing we want to study the the age profile of people in a country, we may not be able to do this with every single individual. So we might collect a sample of people and understand what their ages are, and the sample statistics will tell us what the age distribution is. But the big question is really the objective with which we started is to understand the population age distribution. So can we really infer what the population statistical age distribution would be, given that we have a particular sample distribution of age? So inferential statistics tackles this question about how do you generalize your sample data to the population at large. The third purpose, of course, is to predict the value of a variable, which, if you know the certain other variables related to the situation, which is in the predictive analysis, machine learning, etc. So in this session we are going to focus on if you have a data set which is a sample of the population and you have measured certain characteristics of the population through the sample, and can I generalize the sample values to the population values? That's what inferential statistics is mainly focusing on. What is the motivation behind conducting an inferential statistics analysis? Is really, in many situations, in real life situations, we have claims, or what we term in statistics as hypothesis, that gets made about certain characteristics of the population, phenomena, people, etc. One example is, let's say a mobile manufacturer comes out with kind of an enhanced battery, and he claims that the battery would last 96 hours under normal usage conditions. How do we test it? Because you cannot get somebody to make false claims and get away with it, and it is really an advantage for the manufacturer if it really proves correct that the battery life is 96 hours. Because then he has a competitive edge in the marketplace. So the issue really is, how do we test it out? Or another example is really, let's say a car dealer claims that men in the age group of 30 to 35 who visit the showroom with their family are the ones that he needs to pay attention to. So it's a question of, the car dealer is in his outlet, and then there's a couple of customers who walk in, one in the age group of 30 to 35 with a family, and the other one is not in that particular group. and he needs to decide who needs to pay his better attention to. Again, now the car dealer makes a claim basis his own knowledge of the past, and he says, listen, I think there is a higher chance of somebody belonging to this age group of 30 to 35 and visiting a showroom with the family that they would end up picking up a car, whereas the percentage of conversion amongst people who do not belong to this age group is really low. So that this again is just a claim at this point in time. So in both the cases, we have a claim or a hypothesis, and we need to decide whether we should reject or not reject the hypothesis. The implication of this is, if we do not reject the hypothesis that the battery life is 96 hours, then that gives an advantage to the manufacturer. But if we reject the null hypothesis, then we stop him from making that claim and therefore save certain problems for the consumer. And in the second case, the dealer normally works with maximizing his time in terms of the profits that he makes. Therefore, it's important for him to understand, and if this claim is true, then he should really purposefully focus on people from this age group to really make a conversion. The business decision that needs to be taken will determine the kind of data that will be collected to either prove or disprove the claim or the hypothesis. So let's look at how we will go about it in one of the cases. So a new mobile model claims a battery life of 96 hours, and it would be almost impossible to check every piece that gets manufactured in his outlet for the amount of battery life and then decide on whether it would it really lasts 96 hours or not. That would be both time consuming, and it would have huge cost implications. In fact, most of the quality control functions in most organizations work on the principle saying that we cannot test the entire population for the promises that it makes. We can only take a sample and do it. So it's difficult to check every single piece. Let's call it N, the capital N, which is the entire, let's say he makes, let's say 2 million pieces. And so it's impossible to put the entire 2 million pieces to the test of whether it really lasts 96 hours or not. Therefore, we will have to take a sample of small n from the large n pieces to do the test. So whatever the test mechanism could be, it needs to be a controlled experiment, and because it talks about 96 hours under normal operating conditions, so we need to replicate the normal operating conditions and put the small n number of pieces through this operating condition, and for each piece we will then get an understanding about the number of hours that the battery really lasts. So we find out the battery life of each of the n batteries and take an average, and the idea is generally to see how close the average is to 96 hours. Supposing the average turns out to be 150 hours, we are very happy. So it says it far exceeds the kind of claim. Supposing it lasts only 60 hours, then we can intuitively say, listen, I think it's very unlikely that the battery would last 96 hours. But there's also situations where you are likely to get 93 hours as the average. Now you need to make a judgment about, is this 93 hours, can I conclude that the battery really lasts 96 hours or not? Because if you had taken a slightly different sample of n, you might have got a number which is much closer to 96 than the 93 hours which is suggested by this particular sample. So the kind of sampling and the sample size will determine this average. So at this point in time, we shift our focus from not focusing on what the individual values of the test data are. That is, we are no longer interested in, if n, let's say, is 100, we are not interested in what the individual batteries and how long did they last. That's not important to us. What's important is the average of the test data, how close it is to the 96 hours that has been claimed by the manufacturer. So the issue still remains, did I take the right sample and did I use the right sampling method? So We are therefore now interested in knowing, if I take many samples of n out of this population and compute the average values of the battery life, how will that average be distributed for the battery life? Which takes us to the concept of the sampling distribution of mean. So essentially the data had a particular distribution of, because that each individual battery would have lasted a certain number of hours. We are no longer interested in that. We are now interested in, if we take many samples of n from this large n population and computed the battery life, how would the average of the battery life for each of those tests, how will they be distributed? That's a concept of the sampling distribution of mean. Just to explain schematically, you have a large population and you're conducting an experiment or you're doing a sampling. The population has certain parameters. So the claim in this case really is that the mu, which is the population parameter here, the mu is equal to 96 hours. So that's a claim that the manufacturer is making. In different cases, it could be, for example, the pi is used for proportion. So essentially, let's say if the claim is only 60%, only 10% of the batteries will ever fail. So if that is the claim, then the claim is made not in terms of number of hours, but made in number of percentage of time a failure could occur. So if failure is the parameter that is being tested, then the pi is indicative of the population parameter, which stands for the proportion. And the sigma square is really the variance that exists in the population. So these are the population parameters. We have used some sampling method to pick up small n out of the large n, and this is the sample that we have got. What we can easily compute is the sample statistics. So the sample statistics is x bar. So we have taken a sample of, let's say, 100 pieces out of the population and tested it for the number of hours of battery that they lost, and we find out, let's say, 94 hours is the average battery life for this sample of n. So which is indicated by the x bar. Now x bar is indicative of the mu. So mu is the claim that gets made, x bar is what we have got from the sample. Supposing if it is proportion that we are testing, then the term that gets used is the p hat, and s square is really the variance that exists in the sample. So this average of 94 could come with a large variance or it could come with a small variance. So the s square is indicative of the variance in the sample for the number of hours the battery lasts. The idea of inferential statistics is really, can we use the sample statistics and make certain conclusions about the population parameters? So we use sampling to reduce the large population to a small population, and we are now going to use inference and inferential statistics to make certain conclusions about the population parameter using the sample statistics. As you would notice, the method of sampling and the size of sample are important to inference. So in this procedure of sampling, there are multiple ways you could sample. You could sample it conveniently. You could say, listen, the first 100 pieces that come out, which then is not really indicative of, is not representative of the entire process of their manufacturing. Or you could use a simple random sampling of all the n pieces, which probably is the best method of sampling. Or you could use some kind of stratified sampling or cluster sampling. So there are many different sampling methods. The most often suggested method is really the random sampling method. And the sample size is also important. I mean, to illustrate that, supposing we took a sample of 100 and we found that the average life is 94 hours, vis-a-vis in another case we took a sample of 10,000 and got an average life of 94 hours. Obviously the 10,000 sample size leading to a 94 hours intuitively is a lot more indicative of the claim of 96 hours compared to the small sample of 100. So both the method of sampling and the size of sample are important to inference. The size of sample you would see in the kind of mathematics, it automatically gets incorporated into the computations. The method of sampling is normally assumed to be random sampling in all subsequent discussions. So, the purpose of understanding the sampling distribution of the mean is that the sampling distribution of the mean actually enables us to bridge the gap between the sample statistics and the population parameter. The general idea of the inferential statistics is really to see by is there a relationship that exists between the sample statistics and the population statistics, and can I use that relationships purposefully to make certain conclusions about the population parameters if I know the sample statistics. Let us understand the sampling distribution through a couple of examples. So, this is an example on as I said, if the population parameter that we are interested in is an average of a particular item. So, let us say the average of the battery life, which really is the mean. So, the central tendency that we are interested in is really the mean value. So, let us understand this, and for the purpose of this understanding, let us work with a population for which we really know the complete population values. So, the example we are going to take is let us say whatever be the parameter, the characteristics, let us say we have a population of just 5 and the values of the population is 1, 3, 5, 7 and 9. Let us say that these are the average number of milk packets that is consumed in a day. So, it is only this one household which consumes 1, the other one consumes 3, the third one 5, 7 and 9, and there is only 5 households in the population. So, we know that the mean value of this population is really 5, which is just the arithmetic average of these numbers, and the variance of this population sigma square is really 8. It is again the variance computed out of these numbers. Yeah. So, when we know the population parameters, let us see what happens if we start taking samples out of this population and how does the sample statistics behave. So, to understand that, we really want to estimate the population mean by taking a sample, and let us say we fix the sample size as 2. So, the small n is really 2, the capital N is 5 and the small n is 2. Now, there are many ways of taking a sample of 2 out of 5. So, there is really 5 C2 ways, there are 10 different samples that are possible. So, what is listed here are the 10 different samples. So, we could have a sample which has the household number 1 and household number 2. So, that is it says 1 packet here and 3 packet here, or you could have a sample of 2 where there is one household which consumes 5 and other household consumes 7. So, these are the 10 possible, all possible samples out of this population of n to compute the average. And let us really compute the averages for each of these samples. So, the sample mean for if the sample turned out to be this, then the sample mean is just 2. If the sample turned out to be this, the sample mean is 7. So, the first thing that we notice is that when the true population mean is 5 and we take a sample of 2 to estimate the population mean, we could end up with an estimate that ranges from 2 up to 8. We also have 5, there is only 2 samples out of the entire 10 that gives you the same value as the population mean is. So, when you take a sample, you do not know which sample you have taken, and therefore, if you use just the estimate that you are getting out of the sample, you could be awfully wrong. Supposing you ended up with this sample, so you will estimate that the population mean is really 2 when the actual value is really 5. But let us understand something more about the distribution of the mean. So, when you say the distribution of the mean, what is the average of all the sample means? So, if I need to plot how these sample means are really distributed, are they distributed like this or are they distributed like this, etc. So, when you want to understand that, we need to understand what the average value is. So, the average of all these values is really 5, and if I compute the variance of all these values, it is 3. So, therefore, the mean of all the sample means is 5 and the variance of all the sample means is 3. Yeah. And if I just plot it, so we have the value of 2 as mean occurs just once, the value of 4 occurs 2 times, value of 5 occurs 2 times, etc. So you get a graph like this. Yeah. Let's understand this if we take a different sample size. So supposing we take a sample size of 3 to estimate the population mean instead of sample size of 2. Again, there is 5C3 possible samples, which again is 10 possible samples. So now we take samples of 3 each. So one of the sample could be values 1, 3 and 5, and one of the samples could be values of 1, 7 and 9. And if we compute the sample means again here, we find for the sample 1 we get an average of 3, and for this sample we get an average of 5.67. Again, we see a huge amount of variation that exists in the sample mean, but the first thing that we notice is that the range within which the sample means are occurring are smaller. In the previous case, the lowest that we had was the sample mean x bar was 2 and the highest was 8. Now the sample means are ranging between 3 and 7. Let's compute the average of all these and the variance of this. We find the mean of the sample mean is again 5, and the variance of the sample mean is now 1.33, which was 3 in the case of if the sample size was 2. Again, plotting it, we are finding that the shape of the curve is fairly similar, but it's kind of narrowed in the middle. So by using the kind of values that we got for sample sizes of 2 and 3, let's see whether we can generalize in terms of if the sample size is n, what really happens to the mean of the sample mean and the variance of the sample mean. So to do that, I have just summarized the sample size was 2, the mean of all possible samples turned out to be 5, the variance of all sample means turned out to be 3. And when the sample size is increased to 3, we found the mean of the sample mean is 5 and the variance of the sample mean is 1.33. You could do this for 4. You could also take a larger population and take larger sample sizes. The general principle that you can arrive at using this data itself is that the relationship between mean of the x bars and the population mean is that they are identical. If you take all possible samples of size small n from a population of large n to compute x bar values, and if you take an average of all those x bar values, it will turn out to be the population mean. The relationship between the variance of x bar and sigma square is a little more complex. It's not so easy because for n is equal to 2, the variance is 3. For n is equal to 3, the variance is 1.33. Essentially, you can notice that as the sample size increases, the variance tend to reduce. You could check this out computationally by using the numbers that we have got, but the relationship between the two is determined by this equation. That is, the variance of x bar is really the sigma square, that is 8, divided by the sample size, that is n, that is 2. So let's check out this variance of x bar for n is equal to 2. So you have sigma of 8 divided by small n is 2 multiplied by the big N is 5 minus small n is 2 and the big N is 5 and minus 1. So that's 8 by 2 into 3 by 4. So that's equal to 3. So we can you can do this for the other n is equal to 3 also to check out whether it's the same number or not. This particular term, which is n minus n divided by n minus 1, when n is very, very large, let's say that we are talking about 100,000, the kind of number which is, let's say, a population number, or you have, let's say, 10,000 different pieces that is getting manufactured. So the term n minus n and n minus 1 will approach 1 as n is very, very large. So When n is very large, then the variance of x bar can then be approximated by removing this particular term and just keeping it as sigma square by n. So, when the variance of x bar is sigma square by n, the standard deviation of x bar will become sigma by root n, which is a term called the standard error. So, the standard error of mean is nothing but the standard deviation of the x bar values if you take many different samples of small sample size n from the large population capital N. Yeah. So, as I said, when n is very large, the n minus n divided by n minus 1 will approach 1, and therefore variance can be approximated to sigma square by n. So, what we are now seeing is that both the variance of x bar is related to the population variance because it is connected straight away by sigma square by n, and we notice that the mean of x bar is related to the population parameter because it is equal to the mu, which is a population parameter. Yeah. So, it is this relationship that we want to use purposefully when it comes to inferencing something. So, we started out to see whether there is any kind of relationship that is possibly exist between the sample statistics and the population parameters. Now, this is an indication that yes, there possibly is a relationship that we can work towards. Notice that the population distribution that we started with is really a uniform distribution because we had only 5 households in the population, and for each value that we had, there was only 1 household. So, the population distribution was a kind of a uniform distribution. When the sample mean distribution, when n, the small n is equal to 2, when the sample size was 2, the sample distribution looked like this, and when the sample size is 3, the sample mean distribution looked like this. Now, we looked at what happens when the capital N is very large, but as the small n also increases, essentially as the sample size increases to a large number, which statistics is very comfortable using a number greater than 30, the sampling distribution that you are seeing here is well approximated by a normal curve. So, essentially the idea is what happens when the sample sizes increase. So, when the sample size is greater than 30, the sampling distribution can be reasonably well approximated by a normal curve with a mean of mu, which is a parameter, which is a population mean, and a variance of sigma square by n, which is nothing but the standard error. Let us understand what the central limit theorem states. So, if the population size is large, then that means this term can be eliminated from the kind of relationship equations that we have, and if the sample size is also large, then the distribution of the sample means can be approximated by a normal curve. And as you know, the normal curve has only 2 parameters, the mu and sigma. Therefore, if I know the mu and sigma, I can construct the sampling distribution for the means for every single sample size that I have. Yeah. Let us understand the implications of it a little later, but if we do this exercise, for example, instead of taking all the 10 samples and computing the x bar, that is the way we constructed these 2 graphs. Instead of doing that, if we used the normal equation formula to construct the sample mean distribution. So, the yellow line is for the sample size of 2 and the black line is for sample size of 3. Yeah. So, this is the way it would be constructed. As you can notice that this is very different from these 2, that is because we still have not reached our sample size of greater than 30. So, it is only this relationship is something which works very well when n is greater than 30. and our capital N, which is a population size, is also only 5. Therefore, there is a difference in the way this looks between here and here. But if you had a very large population and if you take a small n of greater than 30, you will find that this approximation is a very, very good approximation for the kind of sampling distribution that you can get by all the samples from the population. Quickly on the central limit theorem, because I think this is a kind of fundamental, an understanding of this is fundamental to understanding of the inferential statistics as to why we do what we do. Yeah. So the CLT states that for large n, the sampling distribution is approximately normal, irrespective of whether the population distribution is normal or not. Now this is very, very important, because most of the time we are here to understand what the population parameters are and what the population distribution is. So we really do not know what the population distribution is. In real life, in most cases, we do not know what the population distribution is, yeah, of the parameter. So it's an important thing to know that irrespective of what the original parameter distribution is in the population, for large n, the sampling distribution is approximately normal. Now, is this true for 100% of the cases? It's true for majority of cases. There are cases where the definition of n as to how much is large is questionable. There are some peculiar data sets where a sample size of 30 may not really give you an absolutely normal distribution. A normal distribution is not the best approximation. Yeah, but we can safely make this assumption that irrespective of what the population distribution is, and if the sample size is reasonably large, the resulting sampling distribution is approximately normally distributed. The important implication of the central limit theorem is this. Even if you do not know what the population mean is, and that is what you want to estimate, and you have taken a sample out of that and you have got a sample mean of x bar, and if that can be approximated by a normal distribution, which is what the central limit theorem states, provided the sample size is very large, that there is a 95% probability that the sample statistic x bar will fall within 2 standard errors of the population mean. So the unknown population mean, so if you start hypothesizing that, listen, the unknown population mean is 96 hours, and if that is true, and if you take a sample x bar out of that, the x bar will lie within 2 standard errors of the 96 hours as a mean, and that's 2 standard errors on either side, so that's 4 AC, and it will lie within 99% probability that it will fall within plus or minus 3 standard errors of the population mean. Yeah, let's look at this through an equation. So what it essentially means is that the x bar very likely to fall given a mu or a hypothesized mu plus or minus 1.96 into sigma by root n, which is the standard error. So 1.96 times the standard error plus or minus the mu would give you the x bar 95% of the times, and for 99% probability, then it's mu plus or minus 2.58 times the sigma by root n. We normally work with a population and we do not know what the mean is, so we want to estimate what the mean is. You get an x bar, then you say, listen, if the mu is this, then you can find out whether the x bar can actually be a realistic value that is coming out of that population. So you can using these two equations, you can estimate whether your assumption about the mu, is it correct or not, because you do not know what the mu is. The mu could be 96 hours, but if the mu is 96 hours, then the sample statistics will fall within a particular range 99% of the time. So if the sample statistic actually falls within that range, then you can say, yes, it's likely to have come from the population which has got a mean value of 96. Okay, let's look at this. So let's say so one hypothesis is that it is 96 hours. or somebody else could say, listen, this is no, it's not 96 hours, it's 106 hours. So if the sample falls here, then you know that it's very likely to have come from this population and not from this population. So it is this leap that we can make from the sample statistic to the population statistic using the central limit theorem and the distribution assumption, and that is an important construct in really understanding and conducting inferential statistics. Till now we looked at the parameter being mu, which is an average of a particular character of the population. Let's see how it works when it comes to proportions. So the example that I'm going to take is really, let's say, the toss of a coin. Let's say that there's a kind of a fair coin that I have, therefore the probability of head being 0.5, probability of tail being 0.5. On any one toss, I will never know what the outcome would be, but over a large number of tosses, I might be able to start predicting the kind of probability that head will turn up if there is a large number of tosses. Yeah. So I'm really trying to compute the proportion of head that will turn up if I toss the coin a certain number of times, and n is equivalent to is the number of trials I'm going to use, which is equivalent to the sample size that we had in the case of the number of batteries from which we are picking up certain batteries to test it out. Yeah. So the probability of head is 0.5, the probability of tail is also 0.5, and let's say that we toss the coin 5 times, and can we really estimate the number of times heads will turn up? Now again, this is a fairly small number of toss of coins, so in each toss there are 2 outcomes, and over 5 tosses there are 2 power 5 different outcomes that are possible. So that leaves us with a total possibility of 32 different outcomes. So in these 32 different outcomes, we can actually make this computation. There's only once that all the 5 times there were no heads. Yeah. So the number of times the 0 heads will turn up if we toss the coin 5 times. There's only just once out of the 32 occasions. So this is really nothing but 1 by 32. So that's a probability value. So the probability of 0 heads turning up when you toss a fair coin 5 times is really 0.03125. Yeah. We can do the same computation for the number of times heads will appear once is really 5. So 5 out of those 32 combinations will have only 1 heads within the 5 tosses. So that's got a probability of 5 by 32. So which is 0.15, etc., etc. So if we know that the coin is fair, and if we toss it 5 times, we can actually compute the probability values of the number of times we will get 0 heads, the number of times we will get only 1 head, number of times we will get 5 heads, etc. Yeah. So this is nothing but the distribution of the probabilities of the proportions. What we have done is really used combinatorics, and so the binomial distribution function, we can use the binomial distribution function to compute the probabilities instead of doing it by actually finding out how many times by manually doing it. So the probability of x being the number of times heads will appear, so this takes value of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So its combination of n is the number of tosses, 5 is a variable that can take any value here, p is the proportion here, so it's a fair coin, so p is 0.5, q is 0.5. Yeah, and we can use this formula, and we can actually, for different x values, that is the number of heads being 0, number of heads being 1, etc., we can actually arrive at the probability values that are there. What's interesting is, again, if the number of trials is very large, that is again, let's say greater than 30, the same probability computations, instead of doing it via the binomial distribution formula, you can also do it through a normal distribution formula. Again, so for when the sample size or the number of trials is greater than 30, you can approximate the probability distribution of the proportions of the number of times heads will appear. You can approximate it using a normal curve with a mu value of NP, that is 5 into 0.5, and the variance value of sigma square, which is 5 into 0.5 into 0.5 for n is equal to 5. But as I said, this approximation works very well only when n is greater than 30. So, it may not work exceedingly well for this particular case, but when you have a large number of trials that you can actually do, then the binomial distribution can also be approximated by a normal distribution. So, we looked at the case of tossing the coin 5 times, and it was easy for us because there was only 2 power 5 options, 32 options. So, we can actually understand what really happens in those 32 options in terms of how many times what is the probability of getting a 0 head, what is the probability of getting 1 head, etc. Supposing we increase the n, that is the number of trials, to 50, and we want to understand what really happens, that is what is the probability of getting a 0 head, what is the probability of getting 1 head up to 50 heads. Now, there are 2 power 50 combinations. So, we can use the binomial distribution, again the formula, to compute what are the probabilities for the number of heads. So, here the only difference is the n is equal to 50, and it says that the probability of getting 0 heads is a very, very low number, etc. But if you look at the cumulative probability, that is adding up all the probability numbers for heads equal to 0 to heads equal to 18. So, you get out of 50 times you can toss a coin, and if the coin is let us say a fair coin, the probability of head being 0.5, getting 0 to 18 heads has got a probability of 3.2%. So, if you repeat this experiment about 100 times, it is only about 3 times that you are likely to get 0 to 18 heads. And the same cumulative probability for 90 into 31 heads is 93.5%, and the cumulative probability for 32 to 50 heads is again 3.2%. Yeah. So, a fair coin will give you 19 to 31 heads out of 50 tosses. So, this is the number. So, if you do this experiment 100 times, you will get 93 times, you will get the heads value being somewhere between 19 to 31, and each time you toss the coin 50 times. Yeah. The reason why I took up this number 52 is really to illustrate what really happens, does the central limit theorem works when it comes to proportions. So, I plotted the binomial distribution as well as a normal distribution, and for the normal distribution, of course, I used what we just now saw, that is mu should be equal to NP, which is 50 into 0.5, and your sigma square is nothing but 50 into 0.5 into 0.5. Yeah. So, if these parameters are input, and one constructs a normal curve, and I plotted the normal curve over the plot of these probabilities that have been derived using the binomial distribution. As you can notice that there is absolutely no difference between the two distributions. So, it essentially suggests that when the sample size is very large, in this case about 50, the binomial distribution is also very well approximated by the normal distribution. So, as we saw it in the case of in the case of averages, the mean, the CLT works as well for the proportions. So, armed with this particular knowledge that there is a kind of a relationship that exists between sampling distribution of mean and sampling distribution of proportion to the population distribution, and B, that the sampling distribution when the sample size is large can be well approximated using a normal distribution. So, using these two facts, we really step now into the realms of actually doing some kind of inferences. So, there are two broad approaches to the inferences. One is the confidence interval approach, and the second one is the hypothesis testing approach. So, let us look at what the confidence interval approach has in store. There are two kinds of estimates which gets made under the confidence interval method. One is the point estimate. So, the point estimate is nothing but equating the population parameter to the sample statistic. So, for example, in the mobile example that we had, we wanted to find out whether the average battery life is 96 hours, and you had conducted an experiment with about 100 sample sizes, and let us say you got a number of 94 hours as the X bar. So, it is really the point estimate of mu is that it is 94 hours. Yeah, so, you are saying that whatever the sample statistics has indicated, that becomes your estimate for mu. Similarly, in the case of proportion, the point estimate of a proportion would have been pi hat, which is whatever proportion that the sample indicates to you. But we know that from our earlier discussions that we know there is a certain kind of relationship that exists between the sample statistics and the population parameter. The X bar, which is the sample statistic. So, for any given mu, so if the population had a particular mu, the X bar lies within plus or minus 1.96 times the standard deviation of the population divided by root n, and there is a 95% probability that this will happen. That is, the X bar will lie somewhere between the plus and minus ranges of mu within this in this equation. So, let us rearrange this equation slightly and get what called the second estimate that we make in the confidence intervals, which is the range estimate. So, not only do we know that mu is, we have got the sample statistic X bar, but we can also estimate a range within which the mu is likely to fall. So, that is nothing but the sample statistics that we got plus z. I have replaced this 9.16 by z. The z is the standard normal, which depending upon the kind of confidence level that you wish to have. So, if you want to have 95% confidence level, then the z will have a value of 1.96, and but if you want a 99% confidence level, then the z would have a 2.576 or 2.58. So, we can estimate a range for mu, which is X bar plus or minus z into the standard deviation of the population divided by root n, which is the sample size. Now, you notice that there is a particular difficulty in this equation, that being the sigma, because in the first instance we are trying to find out what is the mean value within the population itself. So, when we are trying to estimate mu, it is very likely that we have no estimate of the sigma also. So, the sigma is also an unknown. So, there are a couple of ways to tackle this. The first method is, do we have any prior knowledge about what the sigma is? So, let us take an example. Let us say you are trying to figure out, what is the average level of expenditure, let us say a household makes on health, and you want to do this study, and you may have done some past studies, and those past study data can be used to estimate a sigma value, and then you need to make an assumption that the variance and the standard deviation of what it was about, let us say whenever you did the previous study, is equally applicable today, and therefore use the sigma from the past. In case you do not have recourse to such a sigma from the past, then the alternative is really to use the standard deviation of the sample that you have got. So, you are estimating a mu by taking a sample of, let us say 100, and the X bar is arrived from the sample, and the S, which is the sample standard deviation, is equated to the population standard deviation. Now, is this the most accurate method? No, it is not, because the sample standard deviation could be variant from the population standard deviation, but you have no other recourse. If you don't have any information from the past and you still want to compute certain range for mu, this is possibly the best estimate that you can have. We also saw that what is applicable to mean, we can also use that for computing proportions. So the range estimate for a proportion then becomes the p hat, which is obtained from the sample z, and you compute the population sigma by equating it to the sample sigma, and the sample sigma is computed by under root p hat into 1 minus p hat divided by root n. Essentially the underpinning of this is that given a mu, that x bar would follow and can be approximated by a standard normal distribution. So if that assumption is true, then we can arrive at this range estimate for mu as well as for pi. So let's look at this equation and let's see how the different items within this equation affect the range estimate itself. So there are three things that we can notice. So the first thing is that the larger the n, the narrower the range of estimate. So you see that the n appears in the denominator here, and therefore if you increase the sample size, then it automatically gives rise to a narrower estimate. Now as a decision maker, it is more desirable to have a narrow estimate. To give an example, if somebody conducts a test to know whether the battery life is 96 hours and then comes and tells you that the battery life, the range estimate for it is let's say 60 to 150 hours. Now that leaves you nowhere, because the range is so large, you have no way of understanding whether the claim that is getting made is whether it's substantiated or not from the range estimate of the mu that is given. Whereas some other researcher, let's say, comes and tells you that the range is somewhere between 92 and 98 hours. Now that's a far narrower range, and you know that it's very close to the 96 that the claim is, and therefore you can take some decision related to whether the sample substantiates the claim or not. So it is always desirable to have a narrow estimate, and a larger sample size actually provides you a narrow estimate. The second thing that we will see influencing the range estimate is the confidence level. You notice that the confidence level Z appears here, which essentially means that the larger the confidence level that you desire, the larger the Z value would be. So again, if you want to be 99% confident, you would end up with a very large range. Whereas if you are okay with a 90% confidence, then you will end up with a small range. To illustrate this, supposing there is a set of 100 people, let's say in a classroom, and if somebody asks you saying that what do you think will be the average age of this class, you will be 100% confident if the range is, let's say, between 0 and 100. So the average age is somewhere between 0 and 100, you can be 100% confident about it. Whereas if somebody asks you saying that how confident are you that the average age is somewhere between let's say 25 and 30, you can't be as confident. You know, your confidence level will come down. So that's a trade-off that gets made. So as I said, from a decision making point of view, the narrower the estimate, the better it is. But to achieve a narrower estimate, you need to sacrifice certain amount of confidence that you have. So it's a trade-off that you need to play with, and you need to decide what's a confidence level that best suits your purpose. The third item that clearly affects the range estimate is the standard deviation. So the larger the standard deviation that the sample data has or the population has, the wider the estimate would be. To illustrate this, let's say we have got an average of 94 hours for our 100 sample. Now we could have arrived at this 94 hours by 50% of the sample being at 93 hours and 50% of the sample being at 95 hours. Vis-a-vis another case where the values ranged between, let's say, 60 and 120 with an average of being 94 hours. So the standard deviation here is likely to be much higher, and therefore the range estimate here would also be much higher. Yeah. So as we see, there are three things that affects the range estimate. The larger the n, the better it is, the narrower the estimate, which is more desirable. If you are looking for a narrower estimate, then you need to probably sacrifice a bit of confidence level, and the larger the standard deviation of the sample and the population, the larger the range estimate. Quickly on one interpretation of the range estimate. Let's say you take 100 different samples and compute range estimates 100 different times. Now each range estimate would be different, but the interpretation is that in 95% of those cases, the range estimate would contain the population, the true population parameter. So it's about the 95% probability and the 99% probability is more to do with the validity of the test rather than the validity of the mu itself. That is, the more the number of times you conduct the test and compute different range estimates, the more likely that in about 95% of the time or 99% of the time, depending upon the z value, that the range estimate would contain the true population parameter. So let's look at one specific example of our how you compute the confidence interval. So let's take the same thing, which is the new mobile model claims a battery life of 96 hours. So supposing you had taken a sample of 100 mobiles and computed under test conditions how much each of those batteries provide you in terms of number of hours, and let's say you found out that the x bar that we got was equal to 94 hours. So the average of all the 100 samples is that it's 94 hours and the standard deviation is 2 hours. So then we can compute our range estimate. Let's say we want to fix a 95% confidence interval, and 95% confidence level is what we desire. So our mu is really a simple computation of 94 plus or minus 1.96 into 2 divided by root of 100 sample size, which suggests that the sample is the range estimate for the population mean mu is between 93.608 and 94.392. Yeah. Now if you notice that the 96 hours does not sit within the range that we are estimating. So if you are going to use the confidence interval method to arrive at a conclusion about is the new mobile battery really provides a battery hour of 96 hours, you will say no, because the estimated range within which the mu is likely to fall 95% of the times is 93.608 to 94.392, and that does not include the value that we are testing out. We are hoping that would have fallen within this range.